This is the MEN2 podcast with Scott and Mick. On today's episode, a special interview with Senator Duncan Spender. Senator Spender is a founding member of the Liberal Democrats. He spent many years at the Federal Treasury before going to work for Senator David Leyonhjelm after his election in 2013, and now occupies that same federal Senate seat after David Leyonhjelm stepped down earlier this year. You can keep up to date with Senator Spender's pronouncements via the very active LDP YouTube channel. Links in the description. Thanks for your time today, Senator. I know it's
no worries, Scott.
Excellent. I know it's a busy time for you, but before we get into some specific questions, I wonder if you could give us a couple of minutes on your background, your journey to libertarianism, what led you to become a founding member of the LDP to where you are today.
Well, thanks, Scott. I grew up in Brisbane and did my studies there. I was always interested in politics and economics, and I found through my studies that it was pretty clear that the best way we organise ourselves is by letting people organise themselves through markets. Came to join the Federal Treasury, met some really good people there, including John Humphreys, and he had the great idea of starting a political party because you can chat a lot about what you think should be the case, but actually getting in and doing something seemed like a good idea. So we started the Liberal Democrats, and then I went off and had a family, worked in New Zealand. By the time I came back, David Leyonhjelm had made the party a bit more professional, and when he got elected in 2013, I jumped at the chance to go and work for him. So I left the public service in the Federal Treasury, where I'd been trying to make the government a bit smaller, but wasn't very successful, and worked for David Leyonhjelm for the past 5 years, writing material for him, reading all the bills, negotiating. So it's been good. We've made some gains, but with David attempting to get into state politics, he handed over the reins to me, and now I'm facing the electorate.
Yeah. So that battle that you mentioned there about trying to make the government smaller, has anyone ever succeeded at doing that other than temporarily?
I don't think so. Maybe if you have a national crisis or your capital
you're forced to
gets caught in an earthquake, it might happen. But in my studies and my understanding of at least Western civilization, it tends to grow and grow, particularly when you have crises like wars. And it actually reflects theory as well. There's some very sad but quite compelling theory that suggests that democracy leads to more and more social democracy, and people asking for more and more stuff, people being offered more and more of other people's money.
Yeah,
that's where it heads.
Yeah, we did a sort of about an hour podcast a couple of weeks ago on Sweden and Swedish socialism. So-called Swedish socialism. That's exactly how it happened there. They had a massive period of probably 100 years where they had completely free markets and a lot of deregulation, which led to an incredible amount of wealth. And then sort of in the 50s and 60s, the unions and government envisioned the welfare state, and it's sort of all gone downhill from there.
Well, there are some states that try to see the disaster and pull back a bit, but it takes a very rare combination of convincing charismatic politicians to convince the population that they shouldn't keep on asking for free stuff.
So that brings me on to the next question. I asked this question of David Leyonhjelm when I interviewed him maybe 2 years ago now, and that is, how do you sell the message of libertarianism to the public? Because I think you said in your maiden speech to the Senate that the LDP wants to take over the world to leave you alone. Now, the message from the other parties, and particularly since we're in the silly season of an election campaign, is how we're going to intervene in your life more via the government to make your lives better. And the public is somewhat accustomed to this approach, weighing up who's going to give us the most free stuff. So how do you sell the opposite message of, we're going to interfere much less in your life and this will leave you better off?
Well, I do think you have to talk about how people will be better off. We spend a lot of time as libertarians and theorists talking about theory, and we also spend a fair bit of time talking about rights and what should be our rights. But I think to convince the mass population, particularly those who don't go about reading libertarian textbooks, that we have to talk about how it affects them. So we need to firstly talk about tax, and that involves revealing a lot of taxes which are essentially hidden. So if we make people realize more and more all the transactions that end up with some money going to the government all the paychecks that are reduced because of taxes through the income tax system, then we can get people to start imagining what life would be like if they had some more dollars in their pocket.
Yeah.
Similarly, we've got to get people to imagine more what would be the case if they didn't have to keep on confronting these government monopolies. Every time their garbage isn't collected, every time they're waiting in a hospital waiting list, every time their kid comes home from a public school sprouting some crazy indoctrination, we need to make people remember each of those moments, and it's really a task of imagination.
Yeah.
Make them imagine, well, what would be the case if I had choice in those services, if I had money in my pocket to choose people who don't fob me off or give me bad service. We really got to imagine the world in a better way, because so much of it is being provided by government that people find it hard to see what's the alternative. So I think it's a really, it takes a bit of charisma, I think, to make people to basically close their eyes and imagine a better place if they were more in control.
And you can now find the MEN2 podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, Podbean and Castbox. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review. Yeah. So let's go to one of those areas where the government it's making it much more difficult and expensive to get service, and that's the childcare industry. Bill Shorten has made this a big issue of his platform. He's going to magically take tax dollars off some people and siphon it to a specific set of workers, and somehow that's going to help childcare costs come down, which doesn't make any sense at all. You wrote an article recently about childcare. Can you just run us through the basic problem there and how government has gotten in the way?
Well, it's amazing. I look back on budget documents of past decades, and we used to have a situation where childcare essentially wasn't subsidised, and then each year and each decade the subsidies went up and up and up, and surprise, surprise, the prices went up and up and up, and no one found a nirvana where they thought everything was just perfect. There's a lot of price gouging by the childcare providers, but also the government at the same time as ramping up all these subsidies, has been ramping up the regulations on childcare providers, basically saying you have to have certain child to staff ratios, your rooms need to be set up with a certain way in certain sizes, and some of your staff need to have university level qualifications as well. So it is like a train wreck in slow motion. It's as if the government were driving the industry more and more to being a public service like a public school, but without a clear plan to do it. And it's ending up in this hodgepodge that has parents pulling out their hair and then has taxpayers paying an enormous bill. It is absolutely a mess from every direction you look at it. I think we need to return to the basic idea of childcare. If there's going to be any government intervention in childcare, it really is for the quite macabre reason of getting people into paid work and making sure their kids are looked after. If you, as a parent, want more than that, if you want your children to be taught a different language or given a best practice education as a 1, 2, and 3-year-old, then that's a private benefit to you and your kid. Maybe you should pay for it yourself.
That's an idea.
It seems that government has forgotten the idea of why they got involved in childcare at all. It really was for the macabre reason of just getting people into work. And they've been captured by the industry that have this fantastic PR campaign claiming that they're God's gift and that they need more and more money. Now we have the bizarre situation where, as well as the government having 85% subsidy rates for large swathes of parents, and Labor now saying, we're going to lift that to 100%. We have the additional Labor promise that they're saying that even given that, we think that childcare workers won't be paid enough, so we're going to arbitrarily choose as a government to pay some people an addition to their wage. It's completely bizarre. It doesn't make any sense to try to work out what's the reasoning behind it, because I really imagine there can't be any reasoning behind it other than it just seemed like a good idea at the time.
Is it pandering
makes me, as someone engaged in politics, pull out my hair, because it doesn't make a lot of sense.
There's the gender equality debate, or I put debate in inverted commas. A lot of this is pandering to a female vote, because what I've heard from Bill Shorten is childcare workers are underpaid. I think he said something. Everybody knows they're underpaid. They're underpaid. The parents know they're underpaid. This is just truth by assertion. Is there any evidence that they're underpaid?
I'd assert that people that essentially no one is underpaid. We should really rely on the cruel nuts and bolts of the market. If you don't like the pay that you're currently getting, then you have the option of an alternative job with an employer who's willing to pay you an alternative wage. If you don't have an alternative employer willing to pay you an alternative wage, then you've got no claim at all to say that your current job is underpaying you.
Exactly.
You are only as good as that alternative job you could get. So I don't think anyone can really claim to be underpaid. If you really think you're underpaid, then get a different job.
Yep.
If you can't get a different job, then your argument that you're underpaid falls away.
Yep.
Now, the idea that people should equate an idea that the worthiness of a job and how honourable it is with its pay doesn't make a whole heap of sense. I, for instance, think that the arts are extremely worthwhile thing to do, and piano teachers do a great service. It doesn't make me think that piano teachers, one, are paid lots. They're not. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel. But two, I don't think that we need a government subsidy to make piano teachers more highly paid. You have the options before you as to what you do in work. So I find it odd. The gender angle of this is also odd as well. Half the time, politicians like to talk about women being empowered, and the other half the time they seem to argue that women en masse just make really odd decisions and need to be helped in their life choices.
It's a very Victorian attitude, isn't it? It's sort of it's condescending.
If someone chooses to enter into a low-paid industry, the idea that they didn't make that decision with their eyes open and they were making a terrible mistake and it needs to be counteracted is extremely paternalistic.
It's so condescending, because you hear this all the time from the gender equality crowd who think, which strangely they do this in the name of diversity, and yet it seems that what they want is conformity. They want 50-50 representation across every occupational category, which doesn't sound like diversity to me. And so what they're essentially saying is to a lot of women, you chose the wrong job. You don't know your own mind. You can't use your own free will to decide for yourself. You've been fooled by societal gender stereotypes and cultural norms. It's very condescending.
Well, it's amazing we focus so much on the decisions of women in what industries they join, but we could run equally the same condescending argument for various men in various industries. If we actually bothered to look at the terrible deaths on construction sites statistics, we could easily run an argument that men don't make good decisions when they decide to join the construction industry, and they end up dying on the workplace and not coming home safe. If anyone in the public and in the media actually cared about the terrible workplace health and safety stats that particularly affect men, then you could just as easily run an argument that men are making terrible decisions about what industries they choose to go in. It's just, maybe that's the next wave of crazy conversations.
There is one answer that explains both of those things, and you know what it is, don't you? It's the patriarchy. It's the patriarchy that makes women do what they do and the men do what they do. It's the patriarchy. That's the all-encompassing answer for everything.
Well, even if it were, I'd be happy if we moved on to a situation where we were actually concerned about some of the bad things that happen to men in the workplace, such as construction deaths. It's bizarre where I saw David Leyonhjelm raise such issues, and I've raised such issues very briefly in the time I've had in the Senate, and all you get is rolling eyes. How can you possibly be concerned about things that affect men, such as workplace health and safety or high suicide rates? It's really unegalitarian as well as unlibertarian.
Well, back to the childcare debate. Now, I dug out some information from the IPA who said that under the Gillard government she was gone by this time, but it kicked in 2012, the National Quality Framework. And this was part of a broader suite of sort of red tape imposed on the sector. And the IPA costed out that it costs something like $8,000 just to get accredited to work in a childcare centre. That's not a university degree. That's just a basic accreditation to work in one. And it also says that between that time, 2012 and 2018, that childcare costs has risen over 50%. And I've got a quote here. The Australian Childcare Alliance said that a survey of their group's New South Wales branch found that around 60% of operators believe that the NQF, the National Quality Framework, had a negative impact on the cost of running a childcare centre and increased their time spent on paperwork. And less than 15% actually reported an improvement in educational outcomes. So the extra qualifications these people are getting are not necessarily doing anything particular. And I think there's a whole question about, I mean, how educated do you have to be to educate a 3-year-old, 4-year-old anyway? I mean, at that age, I mean, really? I can tell you, I taught 4-year-old kids in Thailand. I tell you, most of the teaching is trying to keep them occupied for more than 5 minutes.
Just don't let them die, I think, is the number one.
But it all comes back down to choice. There will be parents who will say they want their children to be cared for by people who've got certain qualifications, who want the childcare centre to be set up in a certain way. And that's fine. And really, they should be able to have that option in a market with a variety of service, and they should be able to pay for that additional level of service. What's the problem here is that the government has said that every childcare centre needs to be designed in that way. And obviously that generates costs across the board that are partly paid for by parents and partly and largely paid for by taxpayers. The additional fact that because we don't let the market just have variety of service, but instead we require it as government dictate, that then leads to all the forms that people have to fill out. So we have childcare providers and childcare workers contact our office and complain about what we say about childcare. And they say, don't you know how many forms we need to fill in? Our days are very busy. We realise we're not a fan of the forms. So there's a lot of hostility in this space whenever you try to say anything about childcare, because people perceive it as an attack on workers who are doing a good job. Well, you can do a good job without getting an 85% subsidy from government. You can do a good job, and you can have people come to you and choose your service because they're making a choice to do so. But to require everyone to use your services is authoritarian. This
notion of paying people for the value of their work. Now, you and I and Mick here, we're all libertarian-minded. We think that, well, the best mechanism to do that is the marketplace, as you've said. But does this go back to Gough Whitlam's 1972 legislation that was put through that sort of not that when this was about paying women equally? Initially in 1969, I think it was, there was a piece of legislation that said women should be paid equal for doing the same work. So if a woman worked on the abattoir floor, she got the same pay. But in 1972, Gough Whitlam, under Gough Whitlam, there was a piece of legislation that said equal pay for work of equal value. Now, how do you decide what is work of equal value between industries, for example? How do you decide someone on a mining site's value compared to a childcare worker?
Well, I don't know. Beyond the world of having people determine that through using their own money and saying, okay, I think this service is valuable, I'm going to pay for it, and that then gets fed through to the workers. In the absence of that, it's really quite arbitrary, and it moves with the fashions. This relates to the industrial relations system we have in Australia, where we still have a whole range of awards which are basically regulated wages. Basically say, if you're a metal worker, then you're worth this much, and if you're working in hospitality pulling beers, then you're worth this much. It is absolutely crazy, particularly as these award wages in real terms get higher and higher. It eats away any possibility for people to negotiate wages above those award levels. And so it's essentially government determined setting of what you're worth. What's worse, because I'm an economist by trade, so I have a natural affinity to hate lawyers. It's not just government determined, it's determined by lawyers who don't understand economics. So we have effectively quasi-courts that determine pay rates in this country. It would be much better if you had a whole bunch of people like me, economists, doing it. I'm sure I'd do a better job. But you actually have lawyers who have no concept of really supply and demand, saying, "Oh, I arbitrarily think that you're worthwhile, so you this year should get a pay rise."
Yeah,
it's a crazy way to run a country. It's straight out of a Kafka novel.
Yeah, it's exactly the sort of the line that Bill Shorten's taking, isn't it? He's saying childcare workers, they work hard and everybody thinks they're underpaid, they deserve more pay. But this is all just asserted truth. There's no actually underpinning for any of this, these claims that he makes.
Well, it also relates to the claims that are growing more and more that somehow a childcare worker is better at looking after a child than the child's own parents. Now, if we added in a bit of theory into this, we'd talk about the idea of agency. Surely a parent has a greater incentive to look after their own child, to read a book to their own child, than an employee of a childcare centre. Now, we'll have childcare workers up in arms about that, saying, of course they love to read to kids, but does every worker in every industry do as thorough a job as someone who is directly caring about that, in this instance, this child? The idea that it could possibly be the case that every childcare worker would do a better job than a parent in looking after the parent's own child is really quite offensive to parents. But it's becoming the modern fashion to think that parents are essentially unqualified to look after their own children. Independent of the issue of incentives, the basics of looking after children are surely skills that parents, in the most part, have. That involves being able to read. If you can read to your child. That's one of the most fundamental things in childcare. So it is a weird world when to say anything that's moderate about childcare and childcare workers leads to howls of protest. So that's what leads people like Bill Shorten to say this extremely outrageous stuff in the other direction, which is that basically childcare workers should be paid as much as neurosurgeons.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a buddy of mine who's got 2 kids, and he works in government, probably earns over $100,000 a year, and his wife's a nurse, and she probably does pretty well. And I had this argument with him probably a year or 2 ago, and I said to him, why are you getting childcare subsidies? Why are my taxes? I'm single. I don't have any kids. Why are my taxes sort of helping to pay for your kids to go into childcare when you guys earn probably $200,000, $300,000 a year between you? I mean, it's just craziness.
Yeah.
Well, at least through the work of David Lionhelm, and he also, to pay credit where credit's due, he also enlisted Darren Hinch through both of their efforts when this child care package went through 2 years ago. They at least put a cap on subsidies such that it wasn't available for families earning more than $350,000.
Still crazy
now,
to think that someone on a family income of $300,000 needs my tax dollars or the tax dollars of some guy earning minimum wage to pay for that child.
There were howls of protest when David Lionhelm stood up in Parliament and soberly suggested that childcare subsidies should not be available for a family earning more than $350,000. He was accused of being an old white male telling professional women what they can and can't do with their lives. There
was an editorial in the Sydney Morning Herald. Maybe you remember there was an editorial written by a furious mother who was now not going to get childcare subsidies because her household income was over $350,000 a year, and they printed it in the Sydney Morning Herald. I just think, how is someone that clueless about their own privilege, dare I say, that they earn that much money, that they think they're entitled to a childcare subsidy with their household income like that? It's stunning.
I've got an idea.
I think it relates back to our earlier comment about entitlement culture, and over decades, it's ingrained the idea that I am worthy, I deserve more. It's an entire cultural mindset that's growing and growing.
Yep.
It just seems like there's a lot of people out there who can't afford to have kids who are having kids, and then the taxpayers sort of picking up the bill for it.
Well, I also think it's quite sad for people who, for biological reasons, desperately want to have their natural children and can't, and then they're needing to essentially transfer their funds to people who've received the gift of children. I've received the gift of children. I think it's an absolute gift. I'm not trying to denigrate the idea of having kids or the wonder of them. I think they're fantastic. I don't think I should be subsidised for having them.
Is there an argument that we should pay for, everyone should pay for kids' future because they are the future and they will be funding our retirement and health services in the future? Is that an argument you hear?
Well, that's sort of like arguing that we should all subsidise the baker because the baker produces bread and we eat the bread. But it already works that we don't need to subsidise the baker because we buy the baker's bread. Whatever services we get from strangers, including the children of today who will end up providing us services in the future, we will buy those services. If the children currently in childcare end up being doctors, then when I'm old and I need to see a doctor, I will pay that doctor. And so the idea that somehow we need to subsidise everything that's good doesn't make sense because we pay for things that are good. That's how society works.
We're already actually subsidising 12 years of their schooling, aren't we? Children's schooling in public schools.
Yeah, and you can do the complicated maths, but the idea that childless people somehow should and need to pay for other people's children just doesn't add up. Yes, people who are childless now were once children, and yes, in the future they'll use services from those children. But just even in the most basic analysis of this, someone who has multiple children is getting so much more money out of the tax system and out of the government system than someone who doesn't have any children. It's the biggest hidden cross-subsidy in the entire country.
And don't forget to visit us at MEN2podcast.com, where you can find links to all our content via your favourite podcast app. I wonder if I could change gears here. I want to ask you a question. You've had time in the Treasury, you're an economist. I'm going to assume that you're a numbers guy, and you know, because I asked David Leinhelm this question a couple of years ago. The Liberal Democrats have a tax policy of a 20% personal income tax rate and a $40,000 tax-free threshold. Now that's a radical change would be a radical change to the tax system, and the corporate tax rate is also 20%. Is that right? Yep. So my question is always, that sounds fantastic, and I think it's a very easy sell to people to say, look, this is how much more money we're going to put in your pocket with our tax policy. The hard part is reining in the government, the costs. And so I'm assuming you're the guy that's done the costing on this sort of stuff. You know where the cuts need to happen, how they need to happen, whether it's duplication between states or the fact that we've got more administrators in the education department than teachers. Could you run us through sort of the where and how we can cut costs so that we can make up that, at least in the short term, immediate hit to the tax revenue?
Well, the advantage is not only have people like me done these numbers, because we can always be accused of not getting the numbers right, we've also got the Parliamentary Budget Office to do these numbers, and they all add up. That's even though the Parliamentary Budget Office and other official costers will never take into account the massive economic growth impact that would come if you had a 20% flat rate and a 20% company rate and a 40,000 tax-free threshold. They don't even take hardly any of that into account, and they still provide numbers that all add up to not just a balanced budget, but actually starting to pay off the massive debt that's been built up over the past decade. All of those numbers are on the Parliamentary Budget Office's site, so it's not even ours, and it's all publicly documented, and you can add it all up. The main savings that you can and should make in government spending come from the main areas of government spending, and those three areas are welfare, health, and education. The only way to really reduce the size of government is not by fiddling with the smaller parts of government that people get worked up about, like foreign aid. We're not fans of foreign aid, but getting rid of it will only save a small amount compared to everything else. You really need to tackle the areas of welfare, education, and health. And in the areas of education and health, you really need to recognise the fact it's a unsustainable minefield to offer high quality health and education services to absolutely everyone, no matter how well off they are. We've got to stop the situation of churn where high income people and middle income people are paying massive taxes and then getting some of those taxes back in services that they may or may not want in health and education after the public servants have put the ticket on the way through. It is perfectly doable, and we do it in other areas, to means test services so that quality services are available only to low-income people and other disadvantaged people. So we have policies that we've costed that go a large way towards covering all of the tax costs in education and health. In welfare, similarly, we have a lot of middle class and even high middle income and high income welfare that just isn't justified. And I've mentioned before the childcare scenario, but there's also family tax benefits that continue to be available for families with six-figure incomes that just are not necessary and are a massive churn. And it is ridiculous that well-off families who've obviously got much more productive things to do with their time can still find themselves calling up Centrelink and on hold for hours to make sure that they get additional couple of $100 of family tax benefits. It's a bad use of everyone's time.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, because we've talked already about sort of the entitlement culture. Once you've got something, it's very hard to take it away, or at least in people's minds, it's very hard to convince them. If you say to them, I mean, is the sale to the people just as simply as, look, with our tax rate, you're going to have so much more money in your pocket, it's going to add up to far more than the subsidy that you were receiving. I mean, is it that simple?
I think it also, you need to talk about elements of choice and getting rid of frustrations in people's lifestyles. Whenever they find themselves in a waiting list for elective surgery, we really should be saying, if you had your own money in your own pocket, you'd be able to find the hospital that would do your surgery right now.
Right.
Any instances where we come across frustrations, we've got to work out, hey, contribution to that frustration. The government gets so involved in creating regulations and red tape across the economy that most of the frustrations people come across in life from government. So I think we can look for each of those examples, because a lot of the frustrations in society need not occur because they're caused by government.
Yeah. I agree with that. So I wanted to ask you some questions. I wanted to, what do you think about, I know, you don't know if you've been following Andrew Yang, who's one of the Democratic candidates in the US, and he's proposing the universal basic income, the UBI. I was wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Well, the main time that I came across America's current discussions about UBI was when the other Democrat Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I think, released a discussion about this sort of stuff under the Green New Deal banner. And what was really relevant, what was really pertinent as to what's going on in the mindset here is the Q&A document explaining all of this said, this is to ensure that we provide money to people who are unable to work and unwilling to work. Now, when it was pointed out that it's ridiculous, the idea that taxpayers should provide money to people who are merely unwilling to work, they took the document down and said, oh, it was just a draft, when it was clearly not a draft. But that's the mindset here. So whether or not, I don't think the key point is really the intricate design of the scales and the thresholds and the amounts of money. The key issue here is, what are we trying to achieve? And if there's policy being promoted by people who think that the entitlement culture must extend to those people who are just unwilling to work, then I think we've got a big problem. Any system where you think you could flatten out tax rates could be worth considering. Any situation where you think you might be able to reduce the complication of our welfare system, you could work it out. But unfortunately, I don't find it very easy to simplify our welfare system other than just by reducing welfare amounts and making them cut out earlier, because if you look at each of the conditions that we currently have in our welfare system, like we don't just provide the dole to anyone, we provide the dole to people who are applying for jobs. If you went down the path of a universal basic income, you'd essentially be saying, no, we're just getting rid of that condition that you need to look for jobs.
Yeah.
I don't think that most Australians and most libertarians would like the idea of getting rid of that condition. If we're going to have support for people in unemployment, then the taxpayers are allowed to impose conditions saying we provide this gift on the condition that you apply for jobs. And so I think the UBIs essentially goes against that idea of those sorts of conditions. It's nice in theory. We could take some lessons from it, and also from theory on negative income taxes. But the main discussion, the main people who are driving this discussion at the moment are people like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who believe that people should get money because they're unwilling to work.
Yeah.
It goes beyond even Marx, who at least talked about to each according to their needs, from each according to their abilities or something. This says, who cares about your abilities? If you don't want to work, you don't have to do a thing.
Yeah.
It's just bad incentives, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Oh, I sort of, I think, the problem with libertarianism sometimes is it's a really hard sell to people who have been conditioned to get a lot of free stuff from the government. And I've sort of been, me and Scott sort of have long conversations about, how do you get people to buy into the ideals of libertarianism. And I sort of came up with an idea of, why don't we just give them all $3,000 a month, and then we'll just cut 90% of the government and see if that works. See if we can cost that out.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to try to persuade people to essentially not have a selfish mindset. Some tactics you can use, and I sometimes use, is basically say, that sounds good. Now, can you just pass me your wallet? And if they're foolish enough to do so, I just start taking money out of the wallet. And then you can start saying, how is that any different to some stranger called the government doing the exact same thing? But no, I've not come across the perfect sell for libertarianism, obviously, but we've got to keep on trying because it's the right thing to do.
But I mean, I don't know. We used to, I'm going to date myself now. It wasn't called economics when I was in high school. It's called commerce. Then it became commerce in year 11 and 12. But I mean, wouldn't it behoove us to teach kids at a very early age that, look, there is no such thing as government money. It's your money. You pay in taxes. It's corporations that pay taxes, and it would behoove the government to use this money really wisely because it is yours. And the fact that the government, actually, it's just an amalgamation of people who have a lot of whom who don't have any real expertise in any area, who are deciding how billions of dollars of your money is being spent. I mean, do we do a good enough job in the education of young kids on this stuff? Because it seems a lot of people just come out with the idea that the government just has money, it grows on trees, and they just hand it out.
Well, we clearly don't do a good job in the world of education, but I think because we've essentially lost control of the education system to people with a more socialist mindset, and because it's probably inevitable that if you have a centralized government-run curriculum, then that's going to happen. They're the people who are going to end up controlling it. Yeah. I think the best way for us to get better education is to step away from the idea of national curricula and to step away from the idea of state-run education. If we had more charter schools, more private schools, more schools where parents have choice as to where they send their schools, then at least some parents will be able to have the option of a school that doesn't teach them the current claptrap, but instead teach them the basics about money doesn't grow on trees, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Some parents would have that option and they would take it up. It would be slow and steady, but it's better than the status quo.
Could you tell us, could you run through quickly, I mean, I know we've got listeners overseas in the United States, and they will be aware of a voucher system. Could you just run through what that is for Australian listeners? I think it's not a very well-known concept.
Well, it's not well-known, and it's obviously not implemented in Australia. But what should be the case is a bit of a variation of our current Gonski sort of reforms in Australia. In Australia, there are steps to basically say, well, the government funding should follow the student, which is a good idea, and it should also be a bit more for students of disability and students of low means, and that's all fine. But what it doesn't do is allow that money to be the same, whether it is a public school or a private school that the parents end up sending their kids to, and there's very little parental involvement. So the language is okay in Australia. They're moving towards the idea that yes, money should move with the child, and maybe we shouldn't provide every child with a massive amount of cash, but maybe managing disabled children. But we need to take a couple more steps. What we need is to basically let parents choose which school they want to go to, and the same amount of funding that they get under their entitlement applies whether or not they choose a government school or a private school. Unfortunately, at the moment, total government funding, both Commonwealth and state, because we've got a federation, is, I think, at least 4 times greater if you send your kid to a government-run school compared to if you send your kid to a non-government-run school.
Right.
So we're a long way away from a proper voucher system, which says it doesn't matter who owns your school, it matters what are your circumstances. And that would truly empower parents to choose the best schools for their children. So there's a lot of things that need to be done. I think also the degree of government funding needs to reduce, because I don't begrudge funding following a child who's disadvantaged or disabled. But for instance, I'm now on a very highly paid income. I've got this plum job, at least for the time being, of being a senator, and I've got my kids in a public school, and I'm not required to make a contribution. There's various little fees and excursion fees I pay, but the idea that someone on an income as large as mine can have their kids in essentially taxpayer-funded free education is should be abhorrent to every taxpayer out there. But that's our current system.
Yeah. So is that voucher system, is that similar to the voucher system that's used in Sweden?
Yes, I think there are a couple of Scandinavian countries that have attempted something along these lines to various degrees of success, partly because I don't think any country has really done the idea that it can be fully transferable. It's only available depending on the degree of disadvantage and disability of the child. And I don't think any country has removed or restrictions and made sure it's completely movable by the parent. So I'm no expert in the Swedish situation, but my recollection is that most countries have screwed it up, even if they've called their system a voucher system. We, the Liberal Democrats, have a plan for how we think it could be done, and it's not based on any particular country's works, because unfortunately no particular country has done a fantastic job.
It's disheartening, isn't it? Because the debate usually, or the way it goes between the two major parties, is who's going to spend more money on education? And it's the Labor Party who comes out and says, we're going to spend this much and this much and this much. And at the same time, the educational standards kids are graduating with it is slipping. We keep slipping in global rankings. And yet the debate is we should just spend more money. It's like, well, clearly what you're doing is not working. How is more money the answer?
Well, part of the problem is the education unions ensure that the additional money is spread evenly, and any attempt to have differentiated pay based on teacher quality and principal success is hounded down. So we end up with a situation where additional amounts of money just goes to the school, to the teachers, to the principals, irrespective of any KPIs they're meeting or failing to meet. So we've got this system where, and it comes down to the fact that these unions in particular tell every parent that turns up at the school that you've got to support us because we're looking after your children. It's close to immoral, the emotional manipulation that goes on, but it works. And most governments, whether they're Labor or Liberal, in this country at the state level fold when they're confronted with education unions and the prospects of teacher strikes.
Right. So let's say, in a perfect world, you guys win the next federal election, just hypothetically speaking. How quickly do you defund the ABC?
Well, it's basically you give them money until the end of the financial year. Seriously, what I would do, I don't think you'd want to crash the system. I think you'd actually want to make good value of your assets. So the privatization system that we'd approach, I think, would involve first putting advertising on the ABC, and we'd see how much money it could potentially make, and then that would help you break it up. I think you'd have to break it up before you privatize it, and different parts of it would sell at different costs. Some parts, and I think it would make it more politically achievable as well. If you sold off Classic FM and Triple J, there'd be howls, but really no one would have a very strong argument that that's fundamental to Australia's democracy. No. And if you did all that before you sold off regional radio and emergency services, then you wouldn't have to face the fact that a lot of people in regional Australia, particularly when it's bushfire season, are scared of the idea of privatising the ABC. Some have to recognise that to make it work, you've got to break it up and make people realise, hey, taxpayers who don't listen to Triple J shouldn't have to pay for Triple J. And those who happen to listen to Triple J shouldn't have the benefit that everyone else misses out on of ad-free broadcasting. There's no possible argument why some people deserve ad-free broadcasting compared to others. So we definitely sell the ABC. We'd maximise the value for taxpayers of those assets. They're extremely valuable assets all across the nation.
Yeah, true.
And I still think we'd end up with those being used for broadcasting, and it would be better quality broadcasting.
Yeah, exactly. Be much more efficient.
I just want to make a note there that actually the ABC does make money off advertising, and let me tell you how they do it. I make a video that's 10 minutes long, and I take 30 seconds or 1 minute of footage from, say, Q&A and put it in my video and comment on it, which is fair use, and it's fair use because it's transformative, because I'm not just repeating it. The ABC then flags my YouTube video, which gets copyrighted, and the revenue goes to the ABC. That's how they make money. They are making money off people's YouTube videos. So the ads continue to run on my YouTube videos, and the money goes to the ABC.
Wow. Did not know that. Okay.
Well,
so you're funding the ABC.
ABC.
Sorry?
Let's put them in charge of the privatisation.
Yeah.
So today I learned Scott is funding the ABC. That's great. That's good to know.
Oh, it's lovely.
Well, we all are, and it's more than 2 cents a day.
All right. Do you have anything else?
Oh, yeah. So I wanted, there's plenty of things we can talk about. I thought maybe we'd talk about the passing of the censorship bill. There's a few things to run through here. It was passed in the dead of night. No one looked at it. It was just a blanket vote. I think that's interesting. Maybe we just pick up on that point for a start. I think you said something like we could have passed, all kinds of horrible laws, and everybody just nodded their heads and said yes because they got the signal from on high. Is that right, Senator?
Yes. This relates to the abhorrent violent materials bill, so people get a bit of the context of it. This is the bill that came out after the Christchurch massacre, and I think whenever people can't directly do something to prevent something happening, they just need to do something.
Yeah.
And this was the do something. Now, the process here is if both major parties think, oh, yes, they'll help us electorally to be seen to do something after the massacre, then their leaders will agree to pass something, even if they haven't finished writing it, and if none of the major party politicians who will end up voting for it get a chance to see it, scrutinise it, ask what's in it. So This bill could have contained anything. As I said rhetorically, it could have said that everyone's firstborn needs to be killed, and the major party politicians would have voted for it because they don't think their role is to actually look at government, look at legislation, and make sure that government doesn't overreach. They just think they obey their political masters so they can keep on getting pre-selected. So I really urge everyone who's thinking about voting for a major party or even preferencing a major party at this election to think that's what you're getting. You're getting someone who won't even bother reading the legislation that they'll pass if their masters tell them to do it. This is so abhorrent, this behaviour, that it makes me sad for the future of this country that we have these sorts of this approach to party politics. Major party parties in this country, there's a sickness in them. It doesn't help. It breeds this gobbledygook language from the leaders. Never quite clear what they mean. There's a complete inauthenticity in anything coming out of the major parties, and this is just one example. As it happens, a particular bill had silly things in it. It, for instance, was a hastily drafted bill that tried to ban the online streaming or depiction of various things that were offensive in the language of the bill. Who knows what people think is offensive nowadays?
Well, everything.
But also they said we're not just banning anything that's offensive. We'll also ban things that meet various criteria. One of the criteria is you can't show torture on the internet. But the problem is they didn't define it as non-consensual torture. So they basically, without thinking about it, banned sadomasochist websites. Now, I'm assuming there are people who... So if this is just the result of people not thinking everything through, no one consulting, no one thinking it's serious when you create legislation, you're restricting people's lives, we've got to do it carefully. And you've got major party people who just don't care about people's lives being restricted. This particular bill will further reduce the innovation in Australia's IT industry. If you have IT prowess, you think you might create an app, this sort of stuff just makes you think, well, I better not do it in Australia because I'm going to have people who don't understand the industry bring down new laws that don't make any sense, weren't consulted on, and it's just going to impose penalties on me or close down my business. The government repeatedly doesn't know what it's doing in the world of IT, repeatedly introduces these laws and then scratches his head and says, why are we a country of users rather than creators? Well, it's because of this red tape and this idea of ban first and think later. So there's various problems with this bill, but really it's just indicative of how major parties ram through a lot of legislation through that they don't think about, and they don't think about how this hurts people and hurts business.
Well, it's quite clear they don't think, or they don't know for a start, and they don't think through it. I mean, as you said, I think the politicians, especially the Prime Minister, wants to appear that he's doing something because of the outrage around, say, the Christchurch attacks. But, you know, as someone who's a YouTube uploader, 500 hours of video is uploaded every single minute around the world. And the idea that YouTube, I mean, essentially Scott Morrison was calling for penalties for these companies who don't take
jailing directors
and
like all sorts of stuff.
YouTube can't, I mean, YouTube's pretty good. I mean, if something like a beheading video gets on YouTube, they're onto it, but, you know, some people might see it and there's enough time for someone to copy it and someone else to distribute it. I mean, they just can't control this stuff. And as far as Facebook trying to stop people live streaming horrific acts, I mean, they can't know ahead of time. This is just an impossible task. And the government is, you know, they just sound clueless. They just don't know how these sites work. That's what it sounds like.
And I think they're mixing up the bad act by the actor in Christchurch with the depiction of it. The actual depiction of bad things didn't kill anyone. And that confounding of those two issues makes people get extremely worked up about issues such as streaming, because they're really thinking, oh, this involves someone being killed. No, but the streaming didn't kill anyone. It was the killer who killed people. So people just get worked up and don't think things through, and it all also gets wrapped up in this idea that everyone needs to be wrapped up in cotton wool, and everyone is so subject to being influenced. We're all just little children. We're all infantilized, so nothing can be shown.
Yeah, we can't be trusted to make our own judgments and opinions about things. So there's a guy in New Zealand at the moment who's been hauled up in front of court.
He hasn't been sentenced yet.
But he's facing 14 years in jail just for distributing the Christchurch shooters manifesto.
It's absurd.
After they passed new laws right after the shooting.
It's the same sort of mindset that we saw in the federal parliament when we were censuring Fraser Anning, and I joined in the censure. I just thought the motion was, do you agree or disagree with this particular line? And I disagreed with it. Yeah. But the idea that people raised in that debate that we should be trying to deplatform people like Fraser Anning, and I stood up and said, this is absolutely crazy. Yeah. You think that deplatforming someone like that will automatically mean that we don't have millions of people in Australia who have problems with Muslim immigration? Yeah. That doesn't work that way. I was talking to a chamber. I was talking to a chamber full of senators who are all nodding in agreement, saying, "Yes, Muslim immigration is fine, and let's just shut up Fraser Anning." And I was yelling at them, saying, "You're failing in convincing the Australian people of that. Surely we shouldn't just think, close down Fraser Anning, case closed." No, it's not case closed. You can close down some individuals. That doesn't mean that you're convincing people and doing your job of convincing people about what's the right thing to do and what's the right policy settings.
It just makes them putting their heads in the sand. Yeah, it just turns him into forbidden fruit, And I think Alex Jones, since he got deplatformed, his viewership's actually increased.
Yeah, it's a Streisand effect. The quickest way to make people watch something is to ban it. Oh, it must be worth seeing.
We should get this podcast banned.
But it also just furthers the echo chambers. Like, unfortunately, there'll be very few socialists who will be listening to us right now, and so their ideas won't be challenged and their thoughts won't be expanded. Similarly, a lot of people who will listen to this might not be regularly listening into the ABC or listening or reading the Green Left Weekly or other things like that, and we're just increasingly getting into our own little silos. Yeah. It's not helped when we try to deplatform people. It's just legitimizing the idea that we don't need to ever listen to anything we disagree with.
The worst aspect is apart from censorship, it's the self-censorship, isn't it? It's the self-censorship of not saying something that you believe is true because, well, it's not worth it. It's not worth the blowback that I might get. It's not worth the job.
It relates to all the issues we've talked about. As with childcare, yes, there are people who might not think when they're picking up their kids that their childcare worker is any good. They might think they're slack, but they never say it. It is completely the wrong thing to do to ever say that your childcare worker is slack. It couldn't possibly be right. Imagine the howls of protest you will get, and imagine the treatment you'd get next time you pick up your kids. There are some things in this world where people thinking they can't speak freely about very basic things, such as the quality of the childcare they're receiving when they pick up their kids. It's a sad state. Obviously, the Liberal Democrats still say what we want, but unfortunately, we get howled down and labelled and cast as extremists on various issues when we're saying pretty basic stuff. So
if you're not
an entire industry out there to close people down.
I mean, I think in this current environment, if you're not being held down, you're probably not saying anything particularly authentic or principled, I would think. You're just repeating party lines and the consensus view. So, I mean, isn't it a bit of an honour to actually be shouted down and called all kinds of names?
Yep, but at least the Liberal Democrats don't lose sight of the main goal. We actually want to influence policy so we can turn this all around. So it might be fun to say what you want and be held down and you feel good, but if we don't continue to get elected in various parliaments, then we won't be achieving our goal, because we've got to change this system. It's no good just standing on the sidelines and pointing at how stupid it all is. We've got to get in there and change it.
Yep. So what would a good result be at the upcoming election? What are you guys kind of hoping for?
Well, there's a degree of randomness in how all these Senate votes go. So we're running in each of the 6 states, and we've got chances in each of the 6 states. Mm-hmm. It really does depend not just on our own primary vote, which we never can tell where it's going to land. We know we've got some good, solid support, but where it lands on the particular day, who knows? Mm. But it also depends on other variables that are completely outside of our control. The way they do Senate vote counting means that how many votes other people get determines how you're going to get in.
The bigger quota.
Because if you get just over quota or just under quota, then some of your votes will go, some of your preferences will be red or not red. They'll count or not count. So there is a degree of randomness in how the Senate results occur. We are encouraging everyone who's voting for minor parties to continue numbering preferences as much as they can. They should number at least until they get to the Greens, because it could very well be that the final Senate spot will be a contest between the Greens and someone else. Yeah. And if you haven't voted for that someone else, then you're not contributing to that battle for that final seat. If you don't want, for instance, the Greens to win that final seat, you have to put preferences for everyone who could be that someone else. Yeah. And that someone else, we're hoping in at least some states, will be a Liberal Democrat. So even if people aren't voting one for Liberal Democrats, if they prefer us in the final Senate seat rather than the Greens, they've got to keep on preferencing until they get to us.
Yep.
Do you have a how to vote card on your website that people can visit and be shown how to do that all properly?
Whether it's on our website, I'm not sure, but we have made arrangements with other parties to try to get on their how to vote cards. Mm-hmm. And in return for that, we've said we've put people on our physical how to vote cards. We'll have volunteers across the nation handing out those physical how to vote cards. But just for communicating to your listeners, our main advice is you just hopefully vote one for Liberal Democrats, and then you keep on preferencing. Yeah. What we've ended up printing on our how to vote cards isn't really that crucial beyond the voting one for the Liberal Democrats. Obviously, there's some parties I personally favour more than others, but different Liberal Democrats will have different views. Some might like animals and will throw a vote for the Animal Justice Party. Well, that's their right, but please vote one Liberal Democrat. Yep. Some might like One Nation, and they'll throw a preference One Nation's way. Fine. Most of their policies I disagree with, but perfectly fine. But the first preference needs to be, I think, for the Liberal Democrats.
Yep. So where can people find you online and Twitter and social medias and whatnot?
Well, obviously I'm a new senator, so the main channels we're still pushing out all our material are Liberal Democrats channels, so the Liberal Democrats Facebook page, Twitter and the like. I do have my own personal Facebook page, Senator Duncan Spender, and Twitter and Instagram as well. But most of the material we're pushing is being pushed through the Liberal Democrats page. So we encourage people to have a look at that. We're trying to get some interesting material out each day. And we encourage people to vote early and vote often.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, people check out the Liberal Democrats YouTube channel, especially because Duncan has been putting out a hell of a lot of material every day.
Your videos get demonetized as well?
Try to keep it fresh. What was that?
Do your videos get demonetized like Scott's videos do?
Probably not allowed.
Well, I don't think I'm there yet. I'm not in the league of you guys.
You have to qualify.
We're getting there.
No,
you're not on the dark. What do they call the dark intellectual web? What is it? The
IDW. No. You actually you used to be able to sign up to YouTube and just make revenue straight away, but you have to have. The Liberal Democrats would qualify. You have to have 10,000 views on your channel or 1,000 subscribers, which they would qualify quite easily. Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot, Senator. We've run just over time, but thanks much for your time today, and everybody.
Thank you. Always good to talk about liberty and freedom.
Excellent.
And vote for Scott Crow if you're in the seat of
McPherson
in Queensland.
Yep. And Senator Duncan Spender
in the Senate.
Obviously.
Thanks, Duncan.
And all our senators across all the country. Thank you very much, guys. It's been great.
Thanks. Mate. Cheers.